a little bit better. I'll start real quick about PlaySmart, just to explain why we sponsor this, because really what I want to get to is talk about these young men and women up here and all that they've accomplished. But PlaySmart was founded back in 1997. So I'm an interesting story in that coming out of school, I was a scholar athlete also when I was in high school, but from a little different background. I was in inner city Houston and went through some tough times, single mom, kind of a rough area, if you will. Lost several friends before we got out of high school to gang-related violence. Several other folks were incarcerated before we got out of high school, and at one point I actually dropped out. So after my junior year, I dropped out of high school. I had a 4.0, by the way, when I dropped out, but I couldn't take it anymore, and so I ended up in California living on my own, kind of decided that was what I was going to do with my life. And my high school football coach came and found me and got me back and said, "This isn't going to happen. I don't mind watch. Colleges are recruiting you all over the country. This is you're not going to throw your life away like this. You need to come back." And so he got me back from California to Texas, in Houston, where I lived, and lived on his couch. I lost 40 pounds that summer, so colleges don't like that a lot if you're an offensive lineman, just for the record. So because they viewed, what they saw was there's something else going on with this kid. He's got issues, and we don't know what it is, and we're going to move on to the next recruit. But a lot of them stayed interested. One of which was Princeton. And so I ultimately would have the opportunity to go and play football at Princeton University. So having gone from being a kid who had given up on high school and said, college was never in my thought process on any level, to now being at Princeton University playing football. And so as we got out of there, we found some success, me and other graduates and team members of mine. Some went on to play in the NFL, a couple of them did, but then in the business world. And we got together every year for a reunion, because the bonds you make with your teammates will last the rest of your life, and especially at the next level, it's even tighter still. And we talked about what really mattered in life. And I love this luncheon, and I love what you all have accomplished, because what really matters in life, in our opinion, was the combination of athletics and academics. And so PlaySmart was founded. And it's our belief that it's an and proposition, not an or. So we're not a pro sports charity, nor are we just an academic only charity. We're a charity that believes in helping kids like myself, young versions of myself, reach their academic and life potential by leveling the playing field. This is really pertinent, I think, nowadays more than ever before, because of the advent of select sports. Select sports is really the last kind of 20 years that's become a thing, and really, unfortunately, and I'm not taking away from anybody who plays select sports, both my kids did, but it's an economic barrier more than it is an athletic barrier in more cases than not. And so how do you level the playing field and get kids the opportunity to participate on equal footing? Because if you really want to be the best of the best, you got to play the best, and you got to compete against the best, and that's not necessarily always the case today. Well, anyway, we founded PlaySmart, and so our mission is to work with young kids across Omaha, and we do a camp every summer to try to teach them leadership and life skills and give them things to look up to. Because what people, I think, grossly underestimate is that in these neighborhoods, like the one I grew up in, you really don't have role models walking around. I mean, you don't end up living in those neighborhoods if there were great role models in the first place. And the things you think about are sports, because that's the avenue that everyone tells you, but that doesn't last forever. And so I go off to college, I have 5 knee surgeries, I end up being a very mediocre college player, and all thoughts about playing in the NFL kind of quickly faded away. That was my story. I had 2 of my best friends, both ended up playing in the NFL, and 3 of us were thicker than thieves growing up. We had this other philosophy, so I'm going to switch gears now and talk about some life thoughts for y'all as you go forward. But we had this thing growing up in this neighborhood, and we always talked about the most cancerous thing we saw around us was that everybody spent all day envying other people, being jealous of other people, worried about what they didn't have versus being thankful for what they did have. And we just kind of made a pact. And so one guy was Quentin Smith, and ended up being a wide receiver for the Bears. The other guy was O.J. Brigance. If you follow the NFL at all, he played linebacker for the Ravens for many, many years. Unfortunately, he's battling ALS now, but he was a 10-year pro. And then the 4th guy, which was a very good friend, not quite as tight as the other 3, was a guy named Earl Taylor, who played the defensive line for the Buccaneers. And so we were all buddies. I was the one that didn't make it. I was the unsuccessful one, if you will, as I stand in front of you today. But still close today, still stay in touch today. But the point was, we had this philosophy of envy no one. And this is going to be pertinent, because when you go off to college, you go from being the best in the pond that you're in today to really probably struggling at some point or another during that college career, because now you're in a lake or a much bigger ocean. And don't get envious. Just put the work in. Continue to do what got you to where you are today. You didn't get here by accident. You got here a little bit because your parents, a little bit because your coaches, a little bit because of you, and then the people around you that care that helps you get here. teammates, friends, other people that made a difference in your lives. Don't forget about them. But more importantly, figure out how you can emulate what they did, the story Andy was talking about earlier. We all have chances to pay it forward. We all have that kid on our team who's good but doesn't believe they are. And the only way they're ever going to believe it is people like you encouraging them. When you graduate and are gone, you have a little window here before graduation to talk to those underclassmen and encourage them for their futures, to make a difference in their lives. Because all the trophies and other things eventually sit on a shelf somewhere, but the differences you make in other people's lives will continue on forever. So take those windows and take them serious. Don't get caught up in who's better or feels like they're getting more of the coach's attention. Just keep doing what got you here. Stay with the recipe, because it obviously works. You've done great, great things. I mentioned coaches a second ago, so we've already applauded the parents, but and Lord knows, parents, you went through a lot to get these kids up on the stage in terms of the effort you do put in behind the scenes and all of the drives to practices and everything else. But when they get to high school, if we're being honest, and you think about today's competitive nature of high school athletics and achieving the level that they've achieved, the coach almost becomes a bigger impact in their life in those 4 years than parents are even able to be, because they're either at school or at practice, and you see them long enough to say, how was your day? And they say, fine. And then next thing you know, they're in bed, and that's about the end of the dialogue. Both my kids played high school sports, and both were decent enough to play pretty competitively, and the coaches kind of take over. Well, you've got these folks in really good hands, evidently, because look what they've helped produce. So how about a round of applause for all the coaches? And then back to just a couple other things I always like to talk about when I talk to young people. And it's part of kind of what we try to teach our youth. And we work with, in terms of age group, kind of 6th to 8th grade youth. They're old enough to get it and understand, young enough to still be impressionable and maybe listen. And it's most importantly, it's the last chance we get to talk to them before they end up in high school and exposed to, some of the bad influences and obstacles they might run into. But it's an old quote, and it sits behind my desk at Werner. So everybody else was plugging their product. You've seen enough about supply chain. I'm not going to try to ask for any freight today because we can barely haul what's out there, but we're trying. But behind my desk at Werner, and this started when I was 21 years old, just got out of college. I read a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. And she talked about, and so here's the thing, that's more applicable, I think, today than it was back then. And sorry for the coaches that are here every one of these, because they hear this every time. But she said, simple minds discuss people, average minds discuss events, and great minds discuss ideas. So I kind of want to break that down real quickly is the one thing I want to make sure that you take away from this. And what she really means, here's my version of that, especially with social media today and everything else. Simple minds sit around on social media and they do all this stuff that's kind of the material things, and they talk about behind the benefit of a keyboard. They get tough with other people, and they get critical of other people, and they spend their mind, their time just talking about people versus doing something to make a difference. And that's a simple-minded activity. I think our country is full, and our globe is full of simple-minded activities right now. And so how do you break that mold and you hopefully move up the food chain a little bit? And average minds discuss events, and that's the typical social media world of checking in wherever you're at and telling everybody and posting your lunch and your dinner and where you went last night and what you're doing. And frankly, in the big picture, nobody cares. We shouldn't care anyway. We should not worry about that. Like, that's great. I'm not saying don't ever do it. I'm just saying that's an average mind event. But great minds discuss ideas, how to make the team better, how to improve yourself, how to work on something with your family, how to make the school make a difference where you're at. That's what great minds do. And so I have to work behind my desk because we have 13,000 people spread all over the globe. And if you think about what happens in an office like the chairman and CEO office that I sit in, people come in all the time and the first thing they want to do is start with, did you see what Bob did? Or let me talk to you about Sally or Sherry or whatever. And we just stop the conversation and I ask them to leave. And when they are able to come back and they're willing to come back and they want to talk about the idea that they have an issue with and the idea that they can make it better, then you can have an educated discussion and really move the needle forward and move the ball down the field, so to speak. So just keep that in mind because it's really easy. And if you take just a day in your life, especially, no offense, but spring semester senior year, including me, I did it too, is the biggest blow-off time in life, right? And so there's a lot of opportunity to slide into the simple mind in a portion of the world. And not all that's bad. You gotta have fun and you gotta enjoy your day. But just really, if you took one day and just did that mental checklist, I think you'd be surprised how much time we spend that is not making our lives or those around us better. And if you can just work and ratchet up and just kind of keep some conscientiousness around working on ideas and being an idea person, you'd be surprised how far you might go. I talked earlier about not being good enough or frail, maybe too frail, because of all the knee surgeries I went through, and I've actually got a knee replacement coming up here in a couple of months. That's the end result of my athletic endeavor. But by being an idea person, here's a kid who grew up with a single mother, more evictions than I care to remember, didn't even attend or don't have an official fourth grade record because we moved and I went to 4 different fourth grades in 1 year, who's now the chairman and CEO and president of a 13,000 person organization. And that's what the power of staying on track with ideas can do for you. So remember that, take that with you and go forward. The next one is those of you that have smartphones, which is probably everybody in the room. There was an article this morning that everyone's news feeds I know is a little different. But Steve Jobs, they talked about an old interview he had done. And I thought this was just brilliant. But it said, you know, what's the most important thing that successful people do? And you would expect this really long, you know, intellectual answer from somebody like Steve Jobs. And he said, it's real simple, and I can do it in 1 sentence, they ask for help. He said success, and I thought about it, and I'm like, oh my God, I've made an entire career of asking other people to help me. Because that's what you have to do, whether it's athletics, academics, in college, that course you may struggle with, just be powerful enough, strong enough, confident enough to ask for help. Because if you ask for help, what are people willing to do? They're willing to give it. People love helping other people, they really do. This is tough with 2 newsmen in the room, but unfortunately, we live in a news cycle where bad news has an echo, bad news sells clicks, papers, and everything else, and good news dies an early death. And so we could convince ourselves, if all we do is listen to the news all day, that everything out there is terrible, but it's not. Most people are good, and most people want to do good things. Ask for their help, and they will provide it. And that's something that successful people do. So I'm honored to be here. The purpose of me being here is to honor you. I cannot be prouder of all that you've accomplished. On behalf of Werner, on behalf of PlaySmart, on behalf of the city of Omaha and greater Nebraska, congratulations, you guys are awesome. I remember those days very, very well when I was at your point in your lives and how scary it can also be. But enjoy these moments, savor them, go off to college and bring the confidence with you. You'll need it, but you already have it. Your inner strength is obvious or you wouldn't be here. So how about a round of applause for these wonderful people?